Hi, I'm Paul.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the People's Podcast. I am your host, Paul Vibes, local motivational speaker. Our show is all about spirituality, self-development, connection, wellness. Please be sure to subscribe and follow us on a variety of different social media pages. If you know somebody that would be a great guest to our show or sponsor, please reach out. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody. Paul Vibes here. Welcome to another very special and first of its kind for the People's Podcast. We have a very special episode with some amazing people who I know personally from the community, and I'm very lucky and privileged to have them on today. We're going to hear first from my good friend Angela from Inner Spirit Yoga in Northport. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. I got some beautiful people on the podcast today. We're going to be talking about some important stuff. I appreciate you taking the time of your busy day. I think you were just telling us you have how many students in one of your trainings right now?
1,028.
You have to add 3 more now. We're in it now.
Yeah, right. We here
Awesome.
now.
Yoga for the brain.
Delicious.
Welcome. You seem good. You seem, every time I talk to you, you seem like you're getting more and more. You're loving this quarantine life. It seems like certain aspects of it, right?
It's absolute magic. I didn't realize. I knew I was a busy person, but I didn't realize how busy I could be and just still be in my own house. So it's kind of neat. And and the beauty of it is you can still get up at 3:30 in the morning. You can still go out, sit down, meditate. You have the whole day. And then you can decompress by the time everybody else is ready to kind of conglomerate at home. So it's nice because it's like we're all here, but at the same time, everybody has their own space. So nobody's actually sitting in each other's face all day.
Yeah.
Because that would be creepy. I'm just saying.
It's funny you said that. You said you could wake up at 3 a.m. or you can wake up at 3 p.m. too, right? I'm sure there's people in your house that you got to wake up. Hey, come on. And
I got one that waits till like noon, and I'm like, hey, you gonna get on that Zoom call with your class? No, it's optional. Like, okay.
Sure it is.
Yeah. Some don't want to see each other. That's the difference too. Like I'm really enjoying. I feel like I'm not missing any interaction because of things like Zoom, because of live streaming through Facebook with classes, or just really, you still have all those connections. People are still texting you. People are still reaching out. But there are some people that have an aversion to being on a camera. Like some people don't like FaceTime, that kind of sensation to it. So they're more than happy to text or talk that, audio wise. But some people just don't want to have a conversation and look at each other the whole time. Because they're probably multitaskers too.
Yeah. I think, Gerald, you spoke about that too earlier. You spoke about how at first you were really hesitant, right, with the whole Zoom calls, and now you're starting to.
I'm from a different era. I'm an old man, so and along with that comes the aversion to technology. You know what I'm saying? So, my son and my daughters, they're always trying to push me into technology. Like my son recently was saying, you need to get rid of that antiquated phone that you have and get an iPhone. And I'm like, well, this serves its purpose. I can dial out and call someone. I can receive the calls. What more is there really? But yeah, I begin to like this virtual space. And I think that it's going to be a permanent part of our infrastructure going forward, I think, and as Angela was saying earlier, you do have some people who prefer this too, because I do anywhere between 45 to 50 individual sessions a month.
Wow.
And you have some people who love to do it this way, and he's saying to me, listen, can we still do this when you go back into the actual space? And that's for Thrive to say. That's for the company to say.
Yeah. And Andrew, how are you doing with as well? Because I know, Gerald, you do classes and workshops through Thrive Recovery Center, and Andrew, you've been doing your yoga sessions through, obviously, Inner Spirit. Are you? Is there any plans to get back into the studio? Or what's going on with that?
If I'll go first. What we're looking at, because at the same time, while, I'm teaching classes and things like that, you're aware that the owner of the studio is not here. That person is completely out of the country. When COVID hit, they weren't allowed to.
She picked a good time to leave.
They could move.
She picked a good time.
She's living her best life, but literally there is no airplanes. There's nothing. She's not allowed to leave. So I had to take that role on in her absence, because we want the studio to survive. So I pay very close attention to the stages that we're in. So the way it looks now, because we weren't able to have all of the teachers teach, because some of them, again, do not have any interest in being online. It's a very different feel for a lot of people. So based on the stages, it looks like studios and gyms and things of those nature come back at stage 4. So we're looking at having smaller in-person classes. So where they had 20, they're going to be limited to having 5 people.
Wow.
So with that being said, it's going to have more of a workshop feel to it. Prior to that, because they have opened up the space, for instance, with kids being able to do things that are recreational, we are probably going to be bringing back early morning beach yoga. So before the masses come out to the boardwalks and things like that, yoga in the park for tweens or teens, but it would be capped out at 6. And those people that are not comfortable coming physically into the studio, we are going to keep a platform where it's virtual. So it's tricky, but those people that don't want to teach at home anymore will now be able to go in the studio alone, lock themselves in, live stream, wipe down every touch point. I have a whole list. I'm a little nuts, and then go on their way. And then the next person that wants to do it can do it too.
Well,
we're looking around, I'm thinking after the 4th of July, so somewhere around July 8th toward possibly the 2nd week in July. And then it could be physical again. Because right now, I can't even get Lysol for my house. How are people opening places?
That's a good point. Yeah. And speaking of people, having difficulties adjusting, I know Eric and we've grown up with technology, and I want to pass it over to Eric. I want to ask you, how are you doing with, everything online? Are you you find it easy for yourself with everything being virtual, or do you still find there a learning curve for you as well?
It's pretty easy. It's definitely a learning curve. I've been learning different parts of like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. It's just a lot of different apps to learn, so it's definitely a learning curve. But I strive. I'm an introvert, so I love being in the house anyway. So this is perfect for me. I own, and in my business that
you guys are all loving it. You guys all love it.
I have my own creative agency, so I work from home anyway, and I try and strive to not have to go to any in-person meetings unless like I absolutely have to in the first place. So this is like normal life for me.
Well, listen, I hope to see you all in person again. It sounds like it's going to be a while to see you guys, because you guys are enjoying this at home life and just almost spitting out our tea there.
Right.
Good thing no one's there to be Spilt because she's all isolated. But I hope
no less.
I hope to be able to hug you guys and engage. And I hope to have you guys in the studio. We can have your own little sections, blocked off and bubble wrap. I don't know, but we'll hopefully get you guys in the studio. But
I'm not sure. Like me liking this is not necessarily based on the fear of maybe catching this thing or whatever, and it's just that the convenience of it. I was saying to Angela earlier, there are moments when I roll out of my bed in my pajamas and I'm in a session, and that to me can be very, very comforting at times. So I think that's more what it is than, like a fear of the virus itself.
Yeah, I think now as a society, especially in business, we're seeing a lot of the pointless things that we go to an office for, or sit in an office or a meeting about. Like that can be a 5-minute conversation, or do I have to sit in an hour meeting for it?
Or the drive, the commute.
Exactly. Do I have to do all of these extra things, waste all that gas money, waste all this time going back and forth to work and from work when I could be home every day and maybe come in once a week, twice a week?
I filled up my car in March. It's still full.
See?
There it is.
Groceries show up Monday mornings, 5:30 a.m. I don't leave. I got nothing.
Exactly.
Oh my God. It's crazy because, Angela and Gerald, we've done a podcast obviously together already. And I feel like we had so much, the both of us, to talk about in our podcast. We could have done a couple hour podcast with what's going on with the COVID virus and the fear. And it seems like we just turned around and a whole bunch of new stuff has happened, stuff that's been happening, unfortunately, for a long time. But I wanted to ask, Angela and Gerald, maybe Angela first, how do you describe, when you reflect on what's going on in the world right now, what thoughts come to mind? How do you feel about what's going on? I know it's kind of an open-ended question, but I just kind of wanted to throw it out there.
I don't feel like it's too open-ended because, it is the elephant in the room for a lot of people. Yeah. But quite frankly, and I don't know if I had this conversation with you, but I think a lot of times I come from a different perspective than a lot of people I've had conversations with or have come across. And it had gotten to the point, and I'm kind of fast forwarding from, yes, COVID was a very big deal. It was intense. It's not over, which is part of the reason why I'm not out there. I don't want to be out there with the people that don't think it's real. I don't want to take I don't want to take a chance when I know that there are people in my house that do have to go out there, and they do. My son is a first responder. You know that.
Yes.
He's about to graduate high school, but he is a fireman. He has to pick and choose what he's going to do to make sure that he doesn't bring this back in the house. He's been tested for COVID because as a first responder, they want to make sure you're not bringing it home and you're not bringing it back to the firehouse. So with that being said, I want to know where I got it, if I get it. No, I'm just kidding. It's a joke. It's totally a joke. Totally a joke. But then we have the entire situation where the Black Lives Matter era came back up. This is not new. This is not something that only happened a few weeks ago. Exactly. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And for some people, they're on a much higher platform. By no means, I am not a yoga celebrity. I am none of those things. I like my little 3.8 mile box, and I call it that because that's where I was born and raised. That's literally the size of my town. But I know that there is a reality to this that I've always instilled in my children. So for those of you that don't know, I have a 26-year-old, I have an 18-year-old, and I raised my nephew who's 15. So they all come from very different walks of life. Now, I'm sure that Gerald and Erik both know, and I'm sure, Paul, you know too, but I just got to put it out there. Black people don't all come in one color. So we don't have one shade. Everybody in my house is a completely different shade. Completely different shade. But with that being said, I know that when I brought my daughter into this world, she was going to have a very different level of treatment than my son would. You will laugh because not one child in my house has an odd spelling to their name. Like, it's if their name is Anthony, it is spelled as Anthony. It is not with an extra I, a Q, or whatever. If it's Ashley, it's Ashley. It's not Leigh, because my old life, I was an HR director for 18 years. I never wanted it to where somebody pulled out their resume and felt like they knew what they were. Just like my nephew, his name is John. It's not Jonathan. It's John. Okay. So we had to prepare our children from day one, before birth, of how they might be treated in the world. So, like I said, this is not new. Like, my name is Angela. I know my parents named me after Angela Davis, but I was not raised with a fist in the air. Those were not topics in my house. So, learning from just the normal experience of life, like my parents grew up in that era. They've seen, people get hosed. They've seen have the dogs released on them. They wouldn't grow up in this little box, but they made sure that our family unit didn't know what a bill was. We never wanted for anything. The schools that I grew up in, maybe 3 to 4, maybe 5% of it were people of color. So it's considered to be something a little sheltered, but then there are people up that are on much, much higher platforms that actually did reach out and tried to I just call it calling me out. Why aren't you saying something? Why aren't you doing whatever? And that's when I had to make it very clear that we all have a purpose. and we all have a role during this transition, because it has to change, clearly.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
for instance, now my kids are completely different. We all grew up in the same, like just like you have siblings, you all grew up in the same household, and you would swear you all had different parents because nobody is the same. But for me, in raising, for instance, my daughter, who is now just finishing up her second master's, she does cybersecurity. Her way of handling the pandemic and this epidemic and the Black Lives Matter movement was she's going to contribute money. She's going to put into the families. And her first inkling 3 days into all of this was, she's like, Mom, I walked outside of my building and someone started calling me like, sell out, you don't want to march with us. And she's like, first of all, I don't even know these people. Okay, we're going to start there. They're all strangers. Mm-hmm. She's like, but they didn't even realize that I contributed money to make sure that his daughter goes to college. So that could be her role. For instance, my son, who now he has to go to these protests and sit in a chief's car and make sure no one gets hurt. He's getting spit at and yelled at. Or someone's calling him on the phone like, you're just like all the others. You don't want to march. And he's like, yeah, but I'm here to make sure you're safe. So he has a role. He has a role to protect and to help. My side, I'm trying to raise healers. I'm trying to raise that person's going to protect your identity. I'm going to try to raise that person that's going to, the only way that I feel that you can combat things like this in the current society that we have and the society that we had 100 years ago is become educated. Learn about your history. It's not always about, we know that slaves were treated badly. We know what lynchings look like. What people need to start looking at is teaching children, and that's not just one race, teach everybody what Black people were like before they became slaves. Where's that information? So I come from a whole different mindset, and it drives some people nuts because I don't, like I said, I'm not going to run around with a fist in the air. I'm more than happy to encourage, and I really do think we do need protesters out there, and we need people with a voice. We need somebody that's radical. Great. That's their role. Mine, I'm going to raise this unit right. I'm going to get the right information. And I got to just say one other little piece, and then I'll stop rambling a little bit here.
It's all good stuff.
But to be honest, I was not taught any of these things in the school system that I was raised in. I did not learn about Juneteenth until I went to college upstate. And that's only because that college was right there outside of Syracuse. And that's a big deal up there. So I had zero exposure to what Juneteenth meant, to a deeper understanding of Black history and culture. I do have a huge benefit that most Black people don't have, where I know where I came from. We have a family historian. We are 18 generations deep. I see paintings, I see drawings. I know what they did. I know that a lot of them were the ones that it was against the law, but they were taught to read and write. So they're the ones that ended up educating the other children in the family from kindergarten through high school. So I come from a little bit of a different spin on it, where I'm like, you can overcome things, but there has to be a way to do it. And everybody has a way. They have their way. So no one's way is wrong. And I think that if somebody did go out there and they did something at some point in their lives, because I think a lot of conversations I'm having too are people that are not Black, and they're worried, they're concerned about how do they speak to it, or they feel like they can't speak to it. And the way that I look at it is, if you've ever made someone feel less than they were because of their color, and you know you did it, you can't not know. You just can't not know. Then you need to go back. And Facebook's a wonderful thing. Maybe you can find that person, maybe you can apologize, but maybe that person is long gone. If that's the case, then you need to sit in it with yourself, commit to not continuing to have that behavior, and ask for that kind of forgiveness from the universe, from your God, from whatever it is, and then start to work through that, and just know that you're not going to go back to that behavior, and learn to teach those around you not to be that way. So I think anybody can speak to it. They just have to make a decision. And on that note, I drop pin.
Drop my drop. There was so many good things you said there, a lot of stuff to dive into. But one of the things I want to say before I toss over back to Gerald is this idea of there's a right or wrong way. And when I had you guys come on, I was open to the idea that you guys all might have very different views. And that's okay. You know, I didn't make assumptions on your views, maybe on Black Lives Matter or this or that, or are you protesting or not? I think like what you said, Angela, is so true that like you see so many people handling the situation in a different way. And that doesn't mean a wrong way. It means, you know, we have our skills, our abilities. And, you know, even myself, I said, how could I use my tools, my podcast for good? And that might be different than with the way that you're helping or that somebody else is helping. So for example, I know we're going to get to Eric in a bit, but Eric's, you know, he's been super busy with the protests and doing some amazing things, organizing people, bringing people together. I've seen footage that he's taken and posts that he's been making, and he's doing his thing. Gerald's doing his thing. And I think it's beautiful to see, kind of like what you're saying, Angela, it's like there's so many ways to help, and it's not just protesting. Protesting is important. I've been able, luckily, to do some of that, but there's so many ways that we can help. And on that note, I want to pass it over to Gerald, because I know you're big into, you know, people's intentions and the energy that people put forth with the things that they are doing. I don't know if you wanted to add on or share something off of what.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pick up Angela's pen.
Yeah, it's the exact pen. Look at that.
And so where do I start? I've been involved with many demonstrations, and in my era, it was apartheid was the big thing, and in fact, I was at one point involved with taking over an administration building at Howard University where I attended, and what I think a lot of people are missing, here, and Angela, I think, spoke to this, was the historical context of what's going on. And if you are not privy to this history, you will be asking really dumb questions like, why would they do that? Why now? Why are they doing this? Why? See, because those questions are brought up because of the vacuum that exists, that, as Angela pointed out earlier, you know, we are not taught these things in the schools here. You're not taught about the wonderful contribution that African people have made to this world. And so you grew up in a society thinking that our history began with Kunta Kinte. And, you know, we think that that's where it starts, but it isn't. And I think if you really want to understand fully what's going on, you have to begin with Google. Yeah, since we're going to be in the technology age, just grab Google. You know, that's one of the things I might agree with my son about getting another phone, because I need, you know, I use Google now for a lot of things, and I can find whatever I want. I can find anything on Google. That's the wonderful thing about it, right? So, and with the advent of Wikipedia and these things, you know, you can go in and find a lot of things. But I think that's what's missing. I wanted to say that's what's missing from the whole conversation for a lot of people, when they're confused about, for instance, someone looting. And looting and burning, for instance, is not something that most people would be like, wow, you know, would say, okay, we need to do that. May not be something that you might say yes. I say yes, because I also understood that when the monks, the Tibetan monks, were sitting in the middle of the square and lighting themselves on fire, it was for the purpose of bringing attention to what's going on. They didn't want to die. They're not martyrs. It is not an act of martyrdom. It's an act of desperation, where it is seen as something that you have to do. It's like a last-ditch attempt to bring attention to a particular situation. And so I'd go into the square and I'd pour gasoline on myself and I would light myself and sit in meditation as I do that, right? And certainly it did work, because now it had brought attention to what the Chinese were doing to the Tibetans in Tibet, and how they were destroying this country and destroying the culture of the country, right? And I think that while looting and so on is not necessarily a sustainable strategy, yeah, it certainly isn't, because you can't just keep looting. You know, you won't get anywhere. You won't get anywhere if you just keep doing that.
Right.
In the same way that when we went into the building and chained the doors and so on, you know, there were many of us who never thought beyond that. We just thought that it was wonderful to go in and chain the doors and shout out of South Africa. We felt that what was great. That wasn't a sustainable strategy either. There were many, many things that need to be done to bring about change. And I think that as I'm listening to the different podcasts, YouTube, you know, and things of that nature, that one of the things that Black Lives Matter has gotten was that it is not a sustainable strategy. And I've noticed that they have kind of laid out some of the things that need to be done, that as far as the economics of what's going on is concerned, and Juneteenth coming up as a strategy also, right? Between a certain time and a certain time, we're not going to buy anything. We're just not going to purchase anything, because America needs to understand that we contribute economically in a very powerful way to what's going on. A lot of people don't know that, you see?
Right.
So now we're going to bring attention to that. We're going to say, look, we do contribute. We're not just here standing on the side selling drugs, or we're not just here in welfare lines, right? And because that is part of the myth, you know, that's going on in this country. And so, you know, I remember, as far as the marching is concerned, I remember they had a conversation with Mother Teresa, right? And she said, and they were asking her, are you going to join the march against the war in Vietnam? And she said, no, not going to join the war, join against war. But if they're marching for peace, I'm there, which is very significant, right? It's because what I know for a fact, and I don't know if it's all the people that's marching, but I know that some of the leaders understood clearly that while we're saying Black Lives Matters, it is not a mutually exclusive statement. It's not saying, well, then white life doesn't, or any other life doesn't, or whatever. It's bring attention to this specific fact, right? And we see it because even though recently this is happening with George Floyd, we see other incidents popping up where the behavior is still continuing because it is so entrenched and so ingrained in the psyche of those who call themselves police or law enforcement, right? Because listen, and I don't know if you have experienced this, Paul, but I know you guys have. I'm driving along, I see a policeman drive up behind me. I'm immediately doing a check in my head. Do I have my license? Do I have my insurance? Is it up to date? Is my hand and so on? Is my blinker working? Is my this? I do this mental thing, and I know it's for every single African person in this country, right? Having said that, it's also important for African people to begin to understand the historical context. You know, my roots go way back to Ethiopia. That's where my ancestors are from. That's where my parents are from, Ethiopia. My father was a Rastafarian. I grew up in a Rastafarian community. Yeah. Every single morning, my father would wake up and he would say to me, "You're a king." And I, as a little youth, would say, what is he talking about? Why does he keep telling me these things, right? I know now why. You see, I know that he's trying to prepare me for a world that will always try to minimize who I am. You see? And that's what's happening in this country. You guys, I never literally came in contact with a racist act until I came to America. And I came to America when I was 21 years old. And I played soccer, so I had a soccer scholarship. I was coming through a tunnel to go play my very first game. And there were people up top, above the tunnel, and I felt water coming down on me. People were spitting at me, and they were saying, "Go back home, Kunta Kinte." This was 1978, right? And this was at the University of Maryland. It wasn't like in Tallahassee or where were those backward places. It wasn't even that. This was at the University of Maryland, right? Right there, close to the capital, where this was happening. So it's not that far removed. I've heard comments of this happening just presently, right? So we know that is the psyche of many in this country. So historical context. For me, I would just put out there, this is what's needed. Meaning we as African people, Caucasians, European, need to understand the historical context. For some of those who will delve into the historical context, they're not going to like it. simply because we taught the world how to live. That is a fact. We, at one point, really ruled Europe. That's a fact. The great Greek scholars all were students in Egypt. That's a fact. So they may not like some stuff that they'll see. And I'm stating these things not to say that anyone is less than. Certainly not, because that's one of the things that we have learned as a people, right? We speak from a perspective, those of us who have a particular level of consciousness do speak from the perspective of all people, of oneness. I know, like, I grew up in a home, Rastafari. Within Rastafari, always oneness. In Jamaica, where I grew up, you have a large percentage of people who are Caucasians, who live, born, raised in Jamaica. I remember taking someone to Jamaica, and they were bummed out that you had all these white people speaking like Jamaicans. It's like, what? But that's how I grew up. It's always oneness for me, and I think for most people who are conscious, it's oneness also. And I just finished with this. There's a African writer. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. He says, for a black man to be minimally conscious, he is for him to live in this country in rage. Just to have an inkling of what's going on, it creates that type of rage for people of color in this country, right? So historical context will make you understand all that stuff, for present day situation.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to pass it over. I'm going to pass it over to Eric, because I know Eric is really want to get in there. I just want to say, like, when you said that, I think it's okay not to know a lot about what's happening or what in the history, but to have the dialogue. I think I think you and Angela, you pointed this out before. For a while, white, black, whatever, there was a hesitation, and even for myself, I was like, how do I act? I feel like I'm going to there's going to be negative repercussion if I do nothing, or if I do something. And I was like, you know what? I have a platform. I want to have people on that I respect, that I trust, that I love, and just have a conversation. If people are going to give me crap for that, screw it. I don't care. I don't know. And it's one of those things, and Gerald, we talk about knowledge. It's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. I admit that there's so much I don't know, but I'm willingness and open to learning and connecting with people. So I said to myself, I'm going to reach out and have this. And I appreciate you all coming on to this first ever of its kind panel. And on that note, I want to, someone I'm very excited to have on here, Eric. I would love for you to, I'm sure you got a lot you want to share, because, you were patient for a while. I appreciate that.
No, awesome, for sure. And thank you, Angela and Gerald, for all of your takes. And as I'm sitting here, I'm getting educated through you guys. A big part of my education is listening to what I call the OGs and the older folks. And so I enjoy hearing you guys speak. So I want to thank you guys as well. Paul, I want to also thank you for being an ally and using this platform as well, because I think what I've been seeing is that everything you guys said is right. People don't know how to be an ally. You don't know what role to play. And that's okay. My thing is just that you have to do something. I even tell my friends, I'm struggling with some of my friends right now because they don't use, and they're Black kids like me. And I grew up with them my whole life, but they don't know how to have that voice or what to say, how to say it. They aren't boycotting certain companies that we all as a collective are boycotting. And it's a trying time right now for me, but I'm trying to have patience because everybody isn't a radical. I mean, I didn't even know I was a radical until this happened, and I was like, no way. Because now it's like I'm an adult and I'm only 24, but in the process of graduating high school to now, you learn a lot. And I chose not to go to college, which I think was the best decision for me because I got to experience real life way faster than a lot of other people. And it puts that perspective into your head that you are more than what meets the eye. But when you have the boundaries, I feel, of college, you kind of, that all escapes you a little bit because you can go to a HBCU and be surrounded by all the Black people in the world and be comfortable and be around people who understand you. But then when you go into the world, that doesn't exist. There's a huge disconnect. A lot of my friends were puzzled at my choice when I was trying college, and I went to York College in Pennsylvania and York, PA, and I didn't want to go to a HBCU. And I said, well, I've been around Black kids my whole life. How am I going to learn the world if I don't go and communicate with other races and be a part of that diversity and inclusiveness that I'm looking for myself? And I feel like with everything going on, it really has opened my eyes to something. I remember somebody mentioned something about all lives matter, and I feel like the all lives matter the whole thing is like when the Twin Towers were bombed, we didn't say what about all the other buildings in the city, because it wasn't about all the other buildings in the city. It was about the Twin Towers, because that was what immediately was happening and going on right now. It was about those folks and those people who were hurt and in pain and in trouble. So I feel like anyone who's watching this, if you do have an all lives matter opinion, I hope that that's a simple enough breakdown for you to just, in layman's terms, understand. If your friend breaks their leg and one of your other friends is standing there and you go help the friend with the broken leg, and your other friend isn't going to say, well, what about my leg? He's not going to say that. So that's just one simple thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that what I've noticed about being outside and protesting, organizing protests, organizing business crawls for Black-owned businesses for Juneteenth, is that as a people, we got to be a little more patient with each other. We have to show a little bit more patience. And I will admit that when this all first happened, I was fired up. I had the fire under my belt. I was getting at everybody who wasn't saying something, because you're just that angry and that enraged. And it makes you take that road that's like, nah, it's no way. It's us against them. We have to go full-fledged in. But dialogue is needed. It takes 30 days, I think, to form a habit. So none of this is going to change overnight. But I think in keeping this consistent and being consistent in protesting, in organizing town halls to educate our people, in figuring out what to boycott and not, it's going to take way longer than 30 days. It's going to take way longer than just this year to make that a habit. Other communities, Jewish community, Asian community, Arabic communities, they've had a while at this. We have not. So I think it's very important that we take the time to be patient with one another, educate each other, and use, I think, the most important tool in this, and why I feel like things will change this time, is that we are starting to realize that we need to weaponize social media. Social media is a weapon if used for the right reason. So if we weaponize social media and use it as a tool to educate, inform, engage, and inspire anyone who comes across our profiles on here, then you open the door for people to be comfortable and anonymously learn things. I post things all day on my socials. A lot of people look at it, a lot of people don't, but it's not really for me to know or care. It's just for me to put it out there and put that energy into the world, and hopefully one person picks up on it. And if just one person picks up on it and is able to go educate one other person, and that spread of information continues, then we'll get somewhere.
Eric, your social media page, you really have, in a positive way, used it as a weapon for good. And you have a great community connection. You can see your page is growing, and there's so much value in content you're putting out. And kind of like back to what Angela and you were just saying, is that each of us have a role to play. And I think as this whole thing develops and as we start, getting more into what's going on and learning, we start to find out what our role is. And obviously things can change and develop, but you start realizing like, oh, where can I be of service? There's a time of need. And some people obviously realize their role sooner than others. And like you said, we need to have patience, right? And Angela, just as you were saying before, like you said that, someone might have been calling out somebody, in your family for not protesting, but meanwhile, they could be donating and really doing more of an impact another way. And we have to realize that there's more that meets the eye. We can't just assume that if they're not out there protesting from 9 to 5, they're not doing something else for the community. And by us coming together, like us doing this podcast, we're realizing, okay, we got Angela doing this, we got Gerald doing this, we got Eric, I'm doing this, and each of us have our own piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And Eric, I want to learn more if you can share with us the experience it's been for you because we didn't talk too much about the protests. How does that feel for you? And how do, if you want to talk about protesting and I know it's different than the rioting, looting, but also touch on what's going on with that. But how is that experience for you? Because when I've been to some of the protests I've been to, it's been a magical experience seeing people come together from all walks of life for the same cause.
No, absolutely. I think the protests for me are the best part. Honestly, I've met and I'm a part of like 4 different networks of organizers for protests now that I've all met from going from different protests on and on and on. And we've all just been connecting and we all have a common goal. It's really great to meet people who all have one common goal or one path or look on life and perspective on the situation, and they understand the overall bigger picture. So I've been lucky to connect with a lot of people. I've learned a few things going to protests. So I'm from Elmont. So my very first protest was like 2 weeks ago in Elmont that a former classmate of mine had organized, and I helped her put it together, and it went really well. Now, Elmont is a different community versus like a Smithtown or a Merrick or any of those other communities. So in Elmont, it's different. We're predominantly Black. The love was there. The feeling was there. Everybody felt comfortable to express themselves, tell their story, speak out, give information. It was a whole different experience than going to a Smithtown in Suffolk and seeing the 5 people show up with Confederate flags, but then all run away because now it's like 1,000 of us. But in Smithtown, I was able to see the pain. I was able to see we had Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, another gang that I'm not too sure, but it's a very dangerous gang. I just can't think of the name of it. We had all of them with us, a part of our protest group. And where they would have thought it would have gotten out of hand, it didn't. And it didn't because
MS-13?
Yes, that's what it is. So where it could have gotten out of hand, where I would have thought it got out of hand, I mean, little different for me. I'm a product of my environment. I've been around all of that before. It doesn't scare me. So in my interaction with them compared to the white people or whoever else might have been there, interaction completely different, thought process is completely different. But I was able to communicate with them and explain that it's okay to be angry. Be angry, shout, scream, whatever. But don't cross the line. Like, I have a video on my phone from us in Smithtown, and originally I think the organizers just had us like walking through Smithtown. I just didn't like that, so I said, let's go to the precinct. So I think they finished their part or their route, and then I said, well, whoever's with me, let's go to the precinct. We marched all the way to the precinct. All 1,000 people actually followed me to the precinct, which was crazy. But it was important. We walked for like 8 miles, but it was important because these people are getting out that anger. That walking for 8 miles and just doing those chants and screaming at the top of your lungs, playing Fight the Power by Public Enemy, that is getting out the emotions. And that's how you don't make the bad decisions. By the time we got to the precinct, nobody wanted to make the decision to cross the line. And the Suffolk PD was outside, riot gear, waiting for us, SWAT teams, everything. They had everything all locked and loaded. They was waiting for us to act a fool. And we had our Black queens stand as a barrier in between us and them. And then I stood and was talking to them, and I was like, yo, shout, scream at them. They deserve it. They absolutely do. Just don't cross the line. And I watched every gang member that was there express their grievances. And they were right. A few of them were screaming and yelling, y'all sit there and y'all look all tough, but y'all aren't ready for what would come and what would happen if we all connected and teamed up and linked up. And I thought that was a powerful statement, because that's very true. They're concerned and scared what happens if our culture as a whole collectively can have one mind and one goal and one focus and one discipline. They're very afraid of that. But I think it's also important for them as gang members or products of their environment, however you want to call it, to realize that they were able to come together for this one goal right now. They were able to do that right now. So they can do that every day. And I think it's two sides to this coin. There's a side where, yes, systematic oppression exists, and there's there's a plethora of ways that we are oppressed, but then there's also the ways that we oppress ourselves. So I think there's two sides to this coin where we have a lot of internal conflicts and issues to find resolve in as a community. And then there's these other things that are out of our hands, essentially, that aren't our job to fix, but it is our job to bring awareness to it and fight collectively to defeat. So from being at protests and watching, it's like I've been seeing both sides of the coin. And I'm just hoping that as it continues and we stay consistent, that people will also open their eyes and wake up, Black people, and especially that are a part of these protests, and realize that you're able to come together with your neighborhood in Brooklyn that hated each other pre-quarantine. You're able to come together. So that should be the focus from now on. As a community, I think these protests are great, but I think now we have to start pushing towards a common goal of what are we looking for as a community, as individuals first, but as a community, because there's several communities. There's a bunch of different Black communities in New York and Asia. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many of us everywhere that collectively as communities, it does take a village to raise a child. So I think we need to get back to that and realize we are a village and we are one within these communities and our smaller demographics, so that collectively, when we get on a social media, or we get a platform to talk to whoever, the cops, politicians, whoever, to say what we want, we'll know what we want, because we'll have done our due diligence to figure it out. And then in regarding the looters and the riots, personally, my thought process this whole time is burn everything down. When they come to conquer a city, historically, they burn the museums, they burn your art, they burn all of your books, they burn everything down. And then they retell your history for you. So I think at this point, just historically, it does have to get burned down. I think America must be burned down to the ground so that the truth can be retold. Every museum is telling false truths. They have all of these historical facts completely twisted and wrong, and all these accounts are one-sided. It doesn't include both sides. So I believe if we do that, it changed the tides. And just historically, the Civil Rights Act that gave us and granted us the right to no longer be 3/5 of a person, but a whole person, that happened 6 or 7 days after $40 million worth of damage was done in 110 riots. So it has to get ugly before it gets better. That's just, I feel like any history teacher will tell you that it just has to get ugly before it gets better. That doesn't make it right or wrong, I feel, but it's just the history of the times. Even in the Haitian Revolution, it had to get ugly for them to maintain their freedom. So there's definitely it's going to take some bloodshed. It's going to take a lot of understanding. Hopefully not too much bloodshed, but it's going to take a lot before we see the full scale change across the entire system that we're all looking for.
I don't know if Gerald or Angela, you have anything you would like to add to that or to work off of?
Well, I could say, listening into Erik's point, and this is why I feel like this conversation and this podcast that you've put out as a platform us is so important, because I think it is important not just for the outside world to see it, but for each of us who do have different perspectives, and some of what we do still blends in together. I am huge on boycotting places, and I have a really quick funny story about that, because when that situation happened with Starbucks, I immediately got on my little chat and asked for my money back. I said, I no longer want to patronize you. And, you know, I'm waiting for little bubbles to pop up, and it waited a while. And then the guy just sent like some generic, hey, have you read our new take on Black Lives Matter? We've got a shirts now, and whatever it was. So it was in the chat. But I actually, and my kids, like, you know, when I told them what I did and I took a picture of it and sent it to them because they were like, Mom's out of control, I literally wrote back in the chat, run me my money. And then I hit send. So the guy had to give me back the money. But I was like, they were like, that's going to mess with whoever was on your chat for the rest of their lives. Because it's probably like, what does that mean? Like, yeah, I just wanted to be a little feral with it. But, you know, back to speaking to Eric's point, I think it is important. And I don't know if, Paul, you're open to doing that. But I think that if, Eric, you do have a list of places that should be boycotted. I only found out about the Home Depot thing after I ordered all this stuff that I had already done from the Home Depot. Like, really, what's happening right now? I wasn't going to send it back. Let me be clear, because I needed it. But going forward, I will not be ordering in the future. So if you do have something that you can find a way to share to maybe a higher platform or a bigger platform, or just even connect with us, even, you know, if you send us something in Messenger, just so that we can spread that to our communities. Because again, it's something very simple people can do. And then they're not having to take any particular type of side, but they do know that, you know, there's power in money. And this is why, you know, I want to teach my kids always to be successful. But at the same time, I remember my husband was just like, what are you doing? I would give my son $20. He was like 8 years old, going to ride his bike. Keep that in your pocket at all times. And I said, if you go to the store and somebody asks for your backpack, give it to them. Do what you got to do. Get your gum, get whatever, get your backpack back. Don't argue with them and go on your merry way. Now, this is, again, coming from that sheltered box regardless, but you know what you have your children walking into. And that's not the same for everybody. The same way if your kid finds the wrong friend, doesn't matter what their race is, but that kid is the one that can always get away with stuff. That's when you have to explain, you can't be around that person because they'll get out of it, but they might turn it around and make it you. So it's a, you know, and one last thing that Eric did say too, but because he grew up in Elmont and his community was filled with a lot of love because the demographic is much higher for his per population. Here, I purposely did kind of the opposite at first. I purposely took my son and put him into predominantly white sports. And then halfway through, I take him out and then put him in a completely mixed bunch. Then I took him out, and you're going like from, like when you're saying you're out in Smithtown, I put him in Comac. Then I put him in Northport. Then I had his whole wrestling team. We were all like, yeah, so we all took him to different places. And then when it was time for him to really learn and get into a sport, I took him and put him into our predominantly Black community. And that was the biggest culture shock for him. He was like, these kids want to use this word loosely. But because of how he was able to stand up and be strong for himself and say, listen, you're going to have to call me by my name. That's not a greeting. Like, he's that different, but that's so important that whatever we're doing as adults and whatever we're doing as parents, we have to make sure that it's all headed in the right direction. We know the obstacles are going to come across. Yeah, that's great. But what if one day he's driving my car and he's not driving his fancy truck with all the fire lights on it? He knows that. And I always teased him when he was little. He's had an actual non-driver ID since he was 1.5 years old on purpose. Literally, his first picture, you see the bars in the back of DMV because he was too short for them. Because I wanted to make sure that he always had an ID on him. Mm-hmm. And to this day, now that he's a driver and everything else, do you know it has the same exact number? It's the same exact number as that non-driver ID. Everything just grew. So you went from this child that was probably 3 feet tall to one that's over 6 foot, but it's a little different for us. We can't just live and be all the time. So we do have to teach our kids differently. I do love the idea of the boycotting. I understand because, you know, when you do look at history, yeah, they had to burn everything down and start over. And I think everybody here plays a very important role. you know, I always felt like as a kid myself that I was always the spokesperson for something. I was the one that I could fit in with everybody, do everything. I was even an exchange student in Russia as an 11th grader in this little 3.0 box. And when I got there, and that was the year of perestroika, so Americans were awesome, the biggest question I got every day for the entire time I was there was, what are you? You're not black. You're not like the people that we see on TV. You're not like the ones around here. Because they had only been exposed to people that were directly from Africa. They had no idea.
Mm.
And what the other thing that they saw were things like Run DMC, or like, so it was just completely opposite of what they didn't know, that there was another spectrum of people. So I think that goes worldwide. I think that's what's profound, seeing the protests when you see it in Amsterdam, and it's getting there. But I think a lot of other countries are going to be a lot more progressive than we are. So it's going to be a lot more work, I think, in America.
Mm.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm.
Like the idea of weaponizing social media. You know, it's a very powerful tool, especially because so many people identify with it. You know, the amount of likes they get or whatever it is. But there's a lot of people who identify with it, a lot of young people in particular, because as we talk about sustainability, we have to prepare the young people. Yeah. Like for me, I know I won't be around to see this change. I know absolutely that it will change, but I know for a fact that I won't be around. So, you know, I was talking to my son the other day. I was saying, listen, I need you to start being more involved, because this is the world you are going to inherit. You know, I'm not going to be here, but you are going to be here, and this is the world. And you know, I think it's Mahatma Gandhi that says, "Be the change you want to see in the world," right? And so this is what I would say to most of the young folks: be the change that you want to see. And I'm thinking that most young folks want to see equality. Most young people want justice. Most young people want oneness. This is how the millennials are. You know, even though there is that aspect of racism that's there and white privilege that's there, most millennials really don't see a lot of color from my perspective. They go beyond that oftentimes. So, you know, it will change. I know it will, you know, but we have to look at sustainable strategies now, you know, and that's what I think, that's where the work should be right now. What are the strategies that are sustainable? You know,
I want to ask you a question on that, Gerald, because you know you talk about your Buddhism and your spiritual practice. We've had dozens of conversations about mindfulness and forgiveness and a lot of different topics. But how do you, if you're talking to a young adult, whether white, black, who's angry and they want to, as Eric was saying, and in history, there's been times where we may not have seen the change if buildings weren't burned to the ground and noise wasn't made and things weren't happening, that change may not have happened. In the spiritual realm, you hear, you know, obviously the inward movement and the outward movement. And what advice would you give to the young adult population, or any age, that's angry? They want buildings to be burnt down. They want change. You know, they may be called radical. What would you say to that population that is feeling like that's the only way that we can make change? You know, how do you incorporate the spiritual aspect of mindfulness into that?
One of the worst, you know, I do a lot of counseling and so on, and therapy. One of the worst things you can tell someone when they're very, very angry and feeling their feelings is to not feel it. Yeah. So it's important to acknowledge that what they're feeling has legitimacy. Yeah. It's not just coming out of the air somewhere, you know? And so the person I was trying to remember earlier is James Baldwin, right? And the quote says, to be a black person with who is relatively conscious. To be a black person who is relatively conscious is to be in constant rage. And I believe that young folks, for instance, who oftentimes are not understood, right? It's important to try to understand them, right? And so the first thing I would do is make sure that I acknowledge what is it that they're feeling and thinking, and that it has legitimacy. And you start there, right? Yes, there's a way to communicate with your fellow man. There's a way to be responsible to your fellow man. As a Buddhist, I believe that all people are one people, one soul, right? We just don't know it because we identify with the I, right? And that creates separation. Anytime you start talking about you as you, I as separate from someone else, that's the, as most Buddhist teacher would tell you, that's the beginning of war. This is where racism comes from, yeah, where we start thinking in a separate, that we're separate from someone else, and eventually start justifying that separation because it's quantified in terms of economics and money and material things and so on, right? So we go through that process. But so that's where I would start, acknowledging what they're feeling. Secondly, allow them to see that even though they may be feeling that way, that person who is behaving in this particular way is suffering also. It is not coming from a conscious place. It really isn't. It's actually madness, And so to really see that as you protest or as you do what you do, it's important to see that, right? So, because at the end of it all, when you burn everything down, you have to build, and you have to build collectively, right? Nelson Mandela knew this. He knew this when he came out of prison after spending 27 years, and he created what is called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. And people were saying to him, get all those apartheid people who were supporting apartheid and hang them, take away their land, whatever. But he couldn't do that because what was interesting about that is that to really build South Africa required every single person. What he did instead was have a rugby game that had everybody there, and South Africa won that year the World Rugby Tournament as a collective, and then move forward as a collective, right? There are things that he did that I would definitely wouldn't do. Yeah, he made mistakes, but I think his heart was in the right place in understanding that, yes, bring it down, but okay, now we're going to build. We have to build collectively because we are one. We are one. We're absolutely one, whether we want to think so or not. And African people always knew this. From they were in Africa, they knew this. We can't lose that humanity. We can't lose that part of ourselves because of the rage that we feel, because of the internalized oppression that we feel. We have to be careful about that. And so from the Buddhist perspective, that's what I would say, right? Yes, we have to do these things, but remember, hold on to your humanity and hold on to your oneness, because that's important, as you move forward. I, for one, is very, very pleased with the amount of white folks that I see marching out there. I look at TV and I'm like, oh, shit. Excuse me.
That's fine.
That's a lot of white folks. like, wow, okay, this is great, right? So I was very pleased about that. And if you remember with Wall Street, same thing. It just wasn't sustained. But as Eric says, it has to be maintained, have to keep it up. Otherwise, it will just peter out like everything else. And we have this built-in forgetfulness, right? This is what we do. And we forget, and we go back until the next, what's the guy's name? Rodney, because that's where it started, right? Until the next George Floyd or the next Rodney and then we start again. The sustainability is important, I think, at this point. Yeah.
That's important, unifying, sustainability.
Yeah.
And I think that'd be good I want to do many more of these with all of you and obviously bring different guests on. I think this isn't a topic that we just talk about and then it ends. It's obviously something that needs to be continual. And I'm hoping that you guys will come on and go deeper into these conversations. And I thought it'd be good to go around as we close up. And like I said, there'll be more of these, but just to finish up this podcast, if we all could go around and maybe share what we want the viewers to walk away. What is your personal message to someone watching? Is despite their color, their sexuality, where they come from, what challenges, what is something that you want people to walk away with? I don't know if that's something, Eric, you would want to start us off with.
Yeah, for sure. I just honestly would want anyone to walk away with the lesson that It's okay to be angry right now. It's okay to be the radical. It's okay to be the quiet person who doesn't know what to say. It's okay to be the person that just donates. It's okay to just be, honestly. Like, it's just okay to be. It's okay to not know how to feel. It's okay to be overwhelmed. I'm super overwhelmed. I will be 100% honest. I've been going for like 2 weeks straight, so I'm super overwhelmed. But being a radical and a rebel without a pause, I keep going and keep striving, because I know if I keep going, that it'll motivate others to keep going. But I just want everybody to know it's okay to just be who you are. Take this time and find out who you are. Educate yourself on your background, where you come from, because I think the most important part of all of this is knowing where you come from so that you can know where you're headed. I think that's the most important part that a lot of people don't understand. And that's how you'll find your role in this ecosystem and in this space that we're in right now. If you start to tap into who you are and educate yourself on wherever you come from, whether it's Ethiopia, whether it's Jamaica, whether it's Africa, whether you're just a Black kid that's just an African-American kid from the South, or from a city in West Philly, and you just grew up in poverty. So all of that is okay. It doesn't make anybody bad or good, but it is your job and your obligation to educate yourself in everything going on, and to be proud of who you are, no matter who that is. And that's what I would want everybody to walk away with.
Thank you, Eric.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, for sure.
How about you, Angela? I don't know if you would like to use this time to just close up any remaining things that you may want to share or say.
Well, I think that, kind of piggybacking off of Eric, because it sounds like even, throughout this entire discussion that we've all had, is that although we all came from a different perspective and a different place, that we actually all truly agree on all aspects and all forefronts. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that Eric was saying, try to learn where you come from, even if it's just a little bit. Because a lot of people have homes, partial homes. And that's where, again, I just, I felt like personally for me, because I have that personal ability to have had someone provide all this information right down to sketches. And to hear when Gerald was talking about the previous history of mankind, I also know that our family comes from Severus. Most people don't know who that is. That goes back to the year 234. And guess what? He was the actual last Black Roman emperor family that was murdered by his own army with his mother. Not many people could dig that out. But at the same time, I would like to share with anyone of any race, of any color, anybody that feels any kind of emotion or something is stirred up within them from this. I mean, whatever that is, I think that it's very important to, coming from the backgrounds and from what we're all doing and what we do for our lives and for a living as well, is that people do need to recognize that they are not actually their emotions. They experience them. And I think Gerald lightly touched on that too, because it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel. It's okay to have all this. And then it could go to the wayside, which is why it has to continually be, that conversation has to be had. These movements have to continue. Otherwise, it's going to dissipate, because we're not our emotions. Yeah. I could be fired up for 5 days straight, and then it's okay because my sunflowers grew. And then, it's like shiny red ball syndrome. We change our mind and we move on to the next thing. So I think that it's important that we're all consistent, that we do keep our emotions in check to a certain extent. I love that Eric said people are able to go out there, scream, voice their opinions. No one was attacked. And at the same time, we've all heard the saying, the revolution will not be televised. Well, I don't think it's happening right now unless it was televised. There has never been a doubt in my mind that these incidents and things that are happening to not just Black men, but Black women, Black children, all along, all the way through, this goes on thousands of times a week. It just wasn't on video. And I think that's what most people didn't understand. So even in my own little yoga community, when, again, I was getting called out, or somebody from another race was like, why aren't you protesting with us? And I was like, because that's not my thing, man. It's just not. But at the same time, I know for a fact that these things go on. Why else would I have been raising my children to make sure that wherever they go, they have what they need to prove that they're where they're supposed to be for that reason and nothing other. So I think that also as parents, if they've lost that connection with their kids, they need to get that back together, and they need to do their research. Like Gerald said, Google's a wonderful thing. Start giving your children the information that they need to know that those pictures of people being lynched and those people being hogtied with concrete bricks on their back and burned alive, that's not our history. It's a part of our history. And yes, that is degrading, and it's horrible, and it's hurtful. And we know that even when we got the right to vote, people were out there and they said, if you can't write your name, now remember, it was illegal to teach somebody how to read and write, then you can't vote. Or you had to go in there and you actually had to recite the entire Constitution of the United States of America without making a mistake, or you couldn't vote. And you know what? There's a few people that did it and they still wouldn't let them vote. So these are things that most people don't know. So I made sure I let my children know, but we all need to do that for all people. And it shouldn't just stop at Black there. They need to incorporate that into our school systems too. All right, and I'm gonna drop pin again.
All right, Gerald, pick that pen up, Gerald. There you go. Oh man, so much good stuff we talked about.
You know what? I at this point, I just want to say ditto for both Eric and Angela. I just want to say ditto, because that's it right there. That's it right there, because that's what we need. Historical context. Certainly, we could go on and talk all day, all night. But yeah, at this point, I just want to say ditto, and thank you guys for sharing the space with me. I'm really appreciative of this, and I hope that our contact doesn't just stop here. I would love to be in contact with you guys, going forward. And thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Oh my gosh,
Thank you guys so much.
Listen, we could do this. This is something I would love, and be privileged to have you guys on again. And then eventually, as cozy you guys are in your pajamas, you can wear your pajamas here. I won't judge you, okay? So you can bring your pajamas here. No Starbucks though. You can't bring that. You got to make your own coffee.
Right, there we go.
Listen, no, but seriously, I love all of you. I'm not afraid to say that, and I love what each one of us are doing to support the community and to do our part, do our role. And I think the main thing for me is just, and for people in my community who don't know what to do, is just be open to learn. That's the biggest thing. Be open to be vulnerable. And when you learn, you're being vulnerable. You're admitting that there's stuff that you don't know. And I think a lot of people in the community, we have trouble with that. We have trouble being, listen, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know the answer to that. But I think there's great strength and there's great leaders that come out of admitting that there's things that you don't know. And every time I do the podcast, whoever I have on, I'm always learning. And I think that today's podcast especially offers a lot of value and just thought-provoking conversations and thoughts. So I really appreciate all of you for coming on.
Thank you.
I do hope that you all enjoy this podcast once it's out, and hopefully come on to maybe dive deeper into the different discussions.
Anytime.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's send good vibes.